Bienvenidos to our second LHC membership webinars program of 2026. We are excited to continue providing a space for important conversations on Latinx heritage conservation. A quick announcement that we wanted to do for y'all for this membership webinar is to remind y'all about Congreso 2026. Our registration is open for our Congreso Leadership Summit, Estamos Aquí 2026. You can visit our website for more information, and it's not too late to be an event sponsor or attend Congreso in Chicago, Illinois next month. You can follow us, sign up for our newsletter, and definitely share with your colleagues. This is what we do every other year, so it's going to be an amazing opportunity. And today's membership webinar presentation is titled Collective Memory in Action, Community Archiving with LHC. And it features our presenters, Jen Moran, our public historian here at Latinos and Heritage Conservation, and Karina Amalbert, our Geospatial Project Manager here at LHC as well. For those on our call today, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. In the interest of time, we ask to please hold your questions until the end, but we are keeping an eye on the live chat and definitely encourage you all to add your notes, reflections, and any questions you may have there. Also mark your calendars and save the date for our next membership webinar in September, also featuring our esteemed panelists today. That one will be on building connections that strengthen Latinx heritage, a focus on community engagement. Finally, just to share some benefits, all of these webinars are recorded and posted on our website. Definitely check us out at latinoheritage.us membership webinars. That's where you can see all of the recordings on our website and also on our YouTube pages. On our Latinos and Heritage Conservation YouTube, we encourage you to subscribe, and there you'll see many different playlists, including a lot of our different projects, recordings from last Congreso, and much more. For those of y'all who are not members and be watching this recording, we invite you to join LHC with a membership. Our membership levels include yearly and monthly payment plans with all types of benefits, including our members-only quarterly newsletter, live access to these webinars, early access to the recordings, and including like programs like our monthly cafecitos with LHC, and a login for our La Plaza online forum, much, much more. Beyond our membership levels, we also have community supporter levels. These have all those benefits and more, and these are great for giving levels for corporations and organizations. Please consider a donation to help us continue this important work, que vale la pena. And if you're already a member, thank you again for your continued support. We appreciate you spreading the word about LHC and the things that we do together. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor over to our presenters to introduce themselves. And thank you all again for joining.
Hi, I'm Jen Moran. As Renee said, I'm the public historian here at Latinos and Heritage Conservation. I am calling y'all from Spokane, Washington. I grew up in Los Angeles and I live in Spokane now. It's finally 80 degrees and I'm very happy. I will pass it to you, Karina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karina. I am the Geospatial Project Manager here, and I am based out of Puerto Rico. So, although it is blazing hot outside, I just today woke up with a cold. So, I'm wearing our LHC hoodie as a comfort hoodie. So we're switching Jen. Usually you're in the hoodie, and I am like in a tank top fighting for my life with the heat. Well, I'll pass it back to you. Kick us off. Tell us what we're talking about today.
Yes, today we are talking about community archiving as preservation. So more specifically, we'll be really thinking through how we care for our stories, our photographs, our documents, our memories, and the cultural practices that center community knowledge. And we'll talk about consent and long-term stewardship of these things. Here at LHC, we often say that preservation is not just about buildings. Buildings matter, of course. This is preservation, historic preservation. But it's also about people, memory, relationships, cultural practices, and everyday places that shape who we are. So when we talk about archives today, we're not only talking about formal archives, libraries, museums, or repositories, but we're also talking about that box of family photos that you have in someone's closet, handwritten recipe cards that are passed down through generations, a flyer from a community protest, oral histories that you record on your phone, this mural that you may pass all the time that holds a neighborhood memory. These stories are connected to a place that may no longer exist, but it still lives in the memory of the people who love that place. And that's really where community archiving begins. So also with this session, we'll draw from LHC's Abuela's Guide. And this is a practical guide for community-based preservation work that I created based off of our Latinx Preservation Toolkit. So the Latinx Preservation Toolkit gives you case studies and like a broad kind of idea of what Latinx preservation is. And the Abuela's Guide takes you through a how-to, step by step, how to do each thing in oral history, how to do archiving, how to make a memory map, things like that. So in that guide, it talks about archives as not static places where materials go and just kind of sit and live forever, but they are living spaces of relationship, memory, and care. And so with that, we will move through three big ideas. First, we'll talk about what community archiving is and why it matters for Latinx historic preservation. Then we'll talk about decolonial archival practice, including consent, reciprocity, language justice, community ownership, and safety, which is most important. And third, Karina and I will share some practical ways to begin a small community archival project. That includes how to use digital tools, what kind of tools we use, mapping, and how our Abuela's archive that Karina does all of the great work with can support this work. But before we begin, I don't know if you can hear my dogs, I'm sorry. Before we begin, I do want to offer a grounding thought before we go further. Community archiving is not about just collecting everything. It's about really caring for what matters. It's about asking who holds memories, who gets to describe them, who has access to them, and how we can make sure that these stories remain connected to the people and places that they come from. And with that, let's move forward. It's Karina.
So just to reiterate everything that Jen said and her big, beautiful brain, I am so privileged to have a public historian, an educator, a know-it-all on my team because she really does help with everything. But in her big, beautiful brain, she gave us some learning objectives as an educator would. So really just again on this side, we just want to harp on that really for this kind of webinar, we're going to talk about community archiving, decolonial practices alongside that, and just long-term care of archival practices and products within there. So I'm going to move on to the next slide today because we keep using the same word of what is kind of like community archiving, what is decolonial, and kind of like why all of this matters. So we just want to really iterate here that we just hopped off of another call and we've been in a lot of conversations for this whole year that when we talk about Latino history and we talk about our memories and we talk about what is the existence, it's really important to recognize a lot of it has existed within ourselves and our ancestors and our communities, and a lot of it has not been properly documented for a very long time. Thankfully, you know, we have tools and love and care now that we are able to start documenting it and start preserving it with care in this digital space. At the same time, we need to recognize that we're playing catch up with a lot of stuff that we might have lost, and that we can't rush this process. So when we do archival work with community care, with decolonial practices, a lot of it is making sure that if it exists where it exists, it's taken care of with love. It's taken care of how the abuelita wanted it to be remembered, that if she wants her beautiful right side of her face to be the picture that is the top picture on that file, then we respect that. But really, we just wanted to center here that archives and the way that we look at archives here at LHC are much more than just a file that's sitting on a desktop or a yellow folder that's in a library. It's something that's living, it's something that's breathing, and it's something that if we don't dust off and maintain and care for, then it will be lost and we can't have that happen. So next slide, Hene. Okay, like make sure I'm caught up on my notes. So we keep using the word community archiving. So I want to say for a second, like, what do we mean by community archiving? And why do we specifically say that we do community archiving as opposed to just saying that we do archiving? So what we mean by community archiving is that we are doing the practice of documenting, organizing, preserving, and sharing materials that matter to our communities. So those materials might be photographs, as Jen was saying. It could be letters. I have love letters from my grandparents where my grandfather's talking about how good he looks, and that's why he sent the picture to my grandma. Documents, home videos. There's home videos of me dancing to Shakira. Oral histories, event flyers, family records, recipes, songs, artwork, social media posts, because media is not leaving us, or memories connected to specific places. So what community archiving does to these materials, makes it the method that's appropriate for Latino communities, is that there is a relationship with these materials. We're asking who created these materials, who's caring for these materials, who has the right to share them, who has access to these materials, and what do these materials mean to the people connected to them and the community around it. So oftentimes community archives, they often begin in a very informal way. A family member usually is the one who took the picture and saves the picture. A church might keep their event programs, a neighborhood organization, they'll collect their flyers and their meeting notes, a teacher records, might have student interviews for a project that the students were doing, a community historian, a self-designated one. They might be keeping tracks of stories about places that are changing or disappearing, or it could be an abuelita that she knows all of the gossip of the town, and she's a living, breathing, walking archive of what happened there. All of that is archival work, and that's really important for us here at LHC is to recognize that there's an intergenerational existence of all of us doing archival work at all times. So for LHC community archiving is the form of Latinx historic preservation because it helps protect stories that have often been left out of official records intentionally. So much of the Latinx history in the United States has been preserved informally, as I said, through kind of families, organizations, churches, food. And these stories, they may not always appear in traditional archives, but it does not make them any less important. Oftentimes, the stories that we are told are the ones that reflect and tell us the most about everyday life, about belonging, about migration, about labor, creativity, joy, and most importantly, resistance. So community archiving reminds us that communities are not just sources of information, they're knowledge keepers, they're decision makers, and they're stewards of their own histories. It is very rare for me and Jen, and we'll talk about this in September when we talk about community engagement. It's very, very rare for us to step into a living, breathing archival experience with an individual and for them to not have strict boundaries of exactly who's going to know what they're about to tell us and how we're going to showcase it. And that distinction matters, right? Because too often communities have been asked to give their stories, to give their photographs, to give their family histories or their cultural knowledge, right? Their expertise to outside institutions without clear information about how those materials will be used, who will control them, and whether the community will have access to them later. If this information is being held within an institution and you don't have access to that institution, then right there you have a blocker between your own history. So community archiving, it asks us to slow down and to do this completely differently. It asks us to begin with relationship, not extraction. It asks us to value lived experience as much as we value expertise and to see them as kind of the same thing. And it asks us to see archiving as a form of care. So when we talk about building an archive, we're not only asking what should we collect, we're asking how do we care for these materials and how to remain accountable to the people and communities that they represent. So that brings us to the next part of the conversation that we keep mentioning. How is all of this a decolonial archival practice, Jen?
Thank you so much, Karina. You mentioned the abuela that knows all of the chisme. I was just telling my fiance that that's my dream. I will sit on the porch with my dog and watch the neighborhood and know everything that's going on with everybody. I can't wait. We're gonna move into now like why decolonial archival practice matters, right? It begins with the understanding that archives are not neutral. And this is something that I really didn't understand until I was working in an archive in my master's program. Archives are really shaped by decisions. So someone, usually the lead archivist, decides what's going to be collected. They're going to decide what they take and what they don't. They'll decide what they leave out. Someone decides how the materials get to be described, where they're stored, who can access them, and what language is used to explain them. That's a big one. For many Latinx, Indigenous, Black, immigrant, working class, and other historically excluded communities, those decisions have made by people outside of the community. So they're not made by us. That means that archives are sometimes have preserved materials that sorry, I lost my spot. That means archives sometimes preserve materials while also misrepresenting them or flattening them so that it doesn't tell the whole story. Or it disconnects the story completely from the people who live them. And I'm sure if you've been in an archive, as someone who's done research, you're really trying to piece that story together, and you don't really you're finding little bits to make the whole thing. Whereas if you just talked to someone and heard their story, you would get it all right away. So the decolonial approach really asks us to challenge that traditional archival, the old, I call it, it's white people stuff. So that one, the traditional European archival standards. So it really asks us to think about power. Who owns the story? Who benefits from that archive? Who has access to those materials? Who gets to describe them? And who decides what should be public and what should remain private? In the Abuela's Guide, we reframe decolonial archiving as a practice rooted in community ownership, consent, transparency, reciprocity, language justice, and care. So it is really a collaboration. It is, for a lot of us, people that I've done oral histories of, or people I've worked with, like we still talk to them years later. We do other things with them, other projects. So we really build a relationship. So I want to talk through a few of these principles really quick. The first one is community ownership and authority. This really means that archives should reflect the priorities and perspectives and values of those communities that they're documenting. So whenever possible, communities should really have a meaningful role in deciding what is preserved, how it's described, where it lives, and how we share it. Secondly, we'll move to consent and transparency. And this is a really, really big one that I'm so proud that we do it here at LHC. People really should understand what they're sharing, how it will be used, where it will be stored, who's going to have access to it. The consent really should not be hidden in complicated language or rushed through as kind of like a formality. And it's ongoing. So before we collect anything from anyone, we really try to explain how we're going to use it. And if you were to say submit something to us or do an oral history with Karina or myself, and then 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, you say, you know what, I don't want to, I want that part, the end of it taken out, or I want my stuff taken down completely. It's yours. It's your story. It's your stuff that we're archiving. You have complete consent. We will take it down. It's not ours. Our purpose is not to extract. It's really just to amplify stories. So that's what we mean when we say it's ongoing. It's always consistent and it keeps going. So someone may feel comfortable sharing a story today, as I said, and feel differently later. A family may donate a photograph and then not want it placed online. They may just want us to hold it. A storyteller may want their name attached to an oral history, or they might want to prefer anonymous. We've had people who did oral histories and did not want to be photographed and did not want their names attached to it. And those choices really matter. And then third, there's reciprocity. So as I said, community archiving should not be extractive. If someone shares their time, their story, their photograph, or their knowledge, we should really ask what are we returning to them? It might mean giving them digital copies of things, printed photographs, transcripts, public acknowledgement, technical support, training, or simply continued communication. It can really look many different ways, but the heart of it really is following through. So, like my dad always says, say what you mean and mean what you say. So always follow through. A man's only as good as his word. That's what he always told me. Um, so the fourth one is language justice. And it's really important to understand that language carries memory. The words people use to describe themselves, their families, their neighborhoods, their histories should be honored. When I start an oral history, I always say, tell us who you are and how you would like to be known. I don't ask their name because to tell us who you are and how you would like to be known, you could be your name, it could be who you are as a person, it could be, I've had people go through their ancestry of when they came to the US or where they're from. There's lots of different ways to answer that, and I love hearing everyone's different kind of view on it. So with archival descriptions, the language that we use should be the language of the community, and we should really avoid imposing academic or institutional terms that don't fit. So on our Abuelas archive, we do collect metadata for the things people submit, but I leave it open to you, to the person submitting, to describe like what is this about? What is this item you're giving us? What's it about? What's the history behind it? What is the title of it? Who's in this picture? So you're really creating that metadata and telling us about this item. It's not me collecting it and then telling you what I think is about it, what it's about. So it's really important to take the person who is donating their time or their story and have them be the center, even in description. The fifth is embodied and relational knowledge. So not all knowledge fits neatly into a folder or a database. Food, dance, prayer, music, storytelling, murals, family traditions, all of these are forms of memory. And they're archives that are carried in your body, in practice, and in your relationships. And then finally, lastly, decolonial archiving requires ethics of care and accountability, like Karina had mentioned earlier. And as I've been saying, it's not a one-time transaction. Archiving is an ongoing relationship. We really have to return to the communities that we work with. We have to share updates. We have to invite feedback. We have to remain responsible to how materials circulate in the public space. Decolonial archiving is not only about where materials are stored, it's really about about how those materials live, who can access them, and whether the people connected to those stories remain part of the decision-making process. Karina is now going to help us expand on how we think about what counts as an archive and how archives are connected to place, memory, and lived experience.
So one of the questions that Jen and I get a lot is this question verbatim is like, is this okay for the archive? Because really when we say archive, it is an institutional word. It's an academic word. So we try to tell people that if when they think of the word archive, of course, like the first thing, more than likely, that's come to our mind, to many of y'all's mind, is a formal institution. Or the second thought might be picture boxes, folders, reading rooms, old documents, or carefully preserved photographs where you have to have the white gloves and you're in the basement, and you're not really sure what time of the day it is, and you're hungry and you're waiting for lunch. But as much as those are archives, those are not the only forms of archives, right? Community archives, they include photographs, they include letters, they include home videos, event flyers, recipes, oral histories, songs, dance, prayer, murals, festivals, clothing. We've seen some of the coolest clothing in archives. I'm just waiting for the fashion trends to come back. Awards, family trees, digital files, social media posts, and mapped memories. So those that don't exist in the formal institution, where do they exist, right? They exist in a family home. They can exist in a community center. They could exist in a church, in an office, a school, a local library, a neighborhood organization, or sometimes, as we're seeing right now, in a digital platform. They could exist in a server in the digital space. It means that community archiving means that it can also live in the practices that people carry and how we carry those forward. So when Jen and we tell people that they're walking archives, we truly mean it, right? Because your mind and your memories it's going to shape this community archive that we're creating. And you're walking with those memories. I'm shuffling through your mind right now, through those folders and seeing what's in there. So when we talk about community archiving and what counts in an archive, food counts. That is a memory. Music counts. That is a memory. Language counts. The slang that was used in one generation is going to influence the language we use in another generation. A mural that told you that you were X distance from your location. It's a memory. It's a material for the archive. A festival or an annual gathering that happened at the site. It's a memory. It's something that's not separate from history. There's ways that communities remember, those ways that they teach each other, and they carry this culture forward. All of that counts as an archive. So this is especially important for Latinx preservation, as we keep saying, because much of our history is connected to movement. We're moving people. We do not stay still. I think I've shifted my position in this chair about 4 times since we started this. We migrate, we labor, we have family networks that cross lands, we have cultural balance practices, and we have place-based memory that we'll talk about in a little bit. So sometimes the places that matter most to people are not the places that appear on official maps or historic registers. They're going to be everyday spaces. They're going to be La Panaderia. They're going to be a school, a neighborhood park, a restaurant, a plaza that had the greasy New York style pizza and a Ross right next to it. It's going to be a family home, a church, a soccer field, a workplace, a community garden, or truly sometimes a street corner that had the pizzeria in the corner. So that's why community archiving and mapping come together within the Abuelas project, and we'll talk about it in a little second. Because when we connect stories to places, we can start seeing patterns. So we can start seeing where people gathered, we can start seeing where they worked, and we can start seeing where they celebrated, where they experienced loss, where they built community, and where important cultural memory still exists and still lives. And we can also see what has changed and what has disappeared. So we're taking that memory that's in your brain, you're orally telling it to us, and now we're placing it on something tangible, physical, on a map that I can literally trace your memories and trace your stories through. So it's powerful because it helps communities document not only what is visible, but also what's been erased, renamed, demolished, displaced, or forgotten by official records. So for the rest of the time here, we want you to think about one item, one place, or tradition in your family community that you would consider a part of an archive. Remembering that almost anything could go into an archive. So it could be a photograph, a recipe, a song. I usually like songs. A building, a festival, a story, a place, or something else entirely. And we want you to put those in the chat because we want to see patterns from this. We want to see what you might consider a part of your archive if someone else might consider that a part of their archive. And then as we continue through the presentation, we'll be referring to the chat so that we can kind of talk about how community archives are not a one size fits all. You can see patterns, but they're not a one size fits all. They reflect the people, places, and practices that communities choose to carry forward in particular areas. So I'm going to toss it back to Jen so that she could talk to us about how to begin a community archive in a practical way now that we've defined what counts, what it is, and why it's decolonial.
So thank you, Karina. Yeah, now what do we do? How do we do this, right? Now that we've expanded kind of our understanding of what an archive can be, we can really begin on figuring out like how we want to go about it. So I want to emphasize that you do not have to begin with some large formal project. You don't have to decide you're going to collect everybody's stories in the whole, Los Angeles metro area. That's crazy. You can actually start with one photograph. That's what our Abuela's archive started with. Literally, it was one photograph. And that photograph was taken because they thought they looked good that day. That's really was their justification behind it, and that is my favorite story still. I absolutely love that. Every photograph tells a story, right? So you can begin with a family story. You can begin with an oral history, one folder of event flyers, a box of materials, one conversation. In community archiving, all the small things matter. So the first step is to begin with like gathering tools and listening. Tools can be items you already have, pen, paper, your camera, your smartphone for recording if you're going to do an oral history. But before collecting anything, ask what is already being preserved and who is preserving it. That might mean talking to your elders, local historians, family members, church leaders, teachers, cultural workers, anybody basically in your community about what they know is already being saved. Because remember, community members are the knowledge holders. They're the experts. So you're going to ask questions like, what stories are important? What materials already exist? Who has been caring for these things? What places hold memory? What concerns do people have about sharing these materials? What does preservation mean to this specific community? The second step really is to build relationships. As we said, it's reciprocity, relationship building before you build your collection. And this is really, really important. Do not begin by asking people to just give you their materials. You really, people are going to be like, what? Yeah, you're not going to, that's the fastest way to turn people off. So you really want to begin by asking what kind of support would be helpful. Maybe someone wants help scanning photos, but wants to keep the originals. Maybe someone has an elder in their family who's getting older and they really want to record their story, but they don't want to put it online. Maybe a community organization wants someone to organize their records, but they don't want to make it public and they really don't know where to start. So relationship building allows those needs and boundaries to be named clearly, and it allows you to take that first step in building them by helping someone out. That's usually, the best way to build a relationship with anybody. And third, you're going to create a simple inventory. So once you do begin collecting, figure out how you want to do your inventory. It could be on a notepad. It could be on an Excel document. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be, like I said, a spreadsheet, a notebook, a basic form. You might want to document what is the item or the story, who owns it, where is the item located, what condition is it in, is it a photo, a document, a recording, a digital file? Does the owner want it copied, described, shared, or kept private? And are there names, dates, places, or stories connected to it? This really helps you understand what exists before making decisions about preservation or access. And then you want to discuss consent and access really early on in the beginning of the process. As we had mentioned before, you want it to happen before you begin scanning, recording, photographing, posting, or sharing anything. I really like to go through consent before I take anything from them, whether it's a story or a picture or anything. You really want to ask, who can see this? Will they allow it to be shared publicly? Could it be used in a presentation, an exhibit, a story map, an archive? Should the person's name be included? Are there parts that should be restricted? And will you allow someone to change their mind later? The answer should be yes, but you have to ask that question. Consent is not just a form. It's not something you sign. It's really a conversation. And the fifth step is really to make copies and return them. Digitization should not remove the materials from the community. So you want to digitize it and hand it back. That's what we do. I love that about our archive. We have them submit. We don't ever hold their actual item. This way, if you share it back, if you scan it and you share the digital copy back and you give them the hard copy too. If you record an oral history, provide the recording and the transcript. If you create descriptions, share them with the person or family so they can correct things. They should have the ability to correct names, dates, places, even the context of it. This is really the big part of reciprocity. They get final approval on everything. Your archive really exists within your community. Our role is not to arrive and create history. Our role is to listen, to connect, to support, and make materials visible in safe ways that the community defines. And when I say safe, I mean physically safe, digitally safe, emotionally safe, and culturally safe. Some materials may be fragile, some stories are painful, some locations may be sensitive. Sometimes on the maps that we use and as well as we don't identify the exact spot for that reason, for safety. Some families have concerns about visibility. Some communities may have cultural protocols around who can access certain kinds of knowledge. All of this should shape the archive. Now, Karina will show us some digital tools, some mapping, and the as well as archive, and how these tools can support the kind of work, this kind of work when they are designed with care.
Thanks, Jen. Also, thank you, Becky, for that memory. I have very particular memories of Sundays at like Home Depot or Lowe's. And like, you know, when your dad would take you on Sundays because like you were there and you would hear a whistle and you would see all the kids just like stop and like look up and like you would see some just like immediately start walking in that direction. That is so valid. Our dads had a very particular whistle to call for us. So we've kind of walked you through what is community archiving, what counts as an archive, how do we start one, and now we're at the point of like, what does it mean to showcase this out to the public? So here at LHC, we do this in a digital format. So, but it's really, really important is that digital tools, it's really helpful in community archives. And this in itself requires a whole other breadth of care. Um, and to remember that it's not a neutral kind of existence. So digital archiving makes materials more accessible. It can help families, researchers, teachers, and community members find stories that they might otherwise not find or that have remained hidden or have been scattered across multiple different institutions. It can help us connect photographs, oral histories, documents, and memories to place. But again, I want to stress this is not neutral. Just because something's placed online does not mean that it should be placed online. Before creating a digital archive or map, we have to ask who benefits from this being public? Who might be harmed if this is made public? What information should be private? Should locations be exact or should they be generalized? Who controls the data? Can people request changes later? If me and Jen are no longer at LHC Dios no lo quiera, are there protocols set in stone for that? And how will this archive be maintained over time? So what's important is that these questions, they remind us that we're working with stories that are connected to private homes, to sacred places, to migration stories that more than likely haven't been told to their children or their other family members, to cemeteries, to vulnerable communities and sites that are at risk. So when we map, we know that mapping is extremely powerful. There's a saying in the mapping world that if it's not mapped, it doesn't exist. I kind of challenge that, and we recognize that from what we're saying on the slide, that the visibility of a map really is a strong tool for recognition of sites. But when you become public and visible, there's harm that comes with that, potential harm that might be there. So when we talk about the setup of care, it's because we reached this point. We want to make sure that there's a relationship between the individual that's telling us a story and making sure that we're caretaking for that place. So a map is going to tell us where families settled, where they worked, what cultural practices happened, where community members gathered, and what sites have been lost. But again, maps can reveal information that people might not want public. In some cases, more often than not, it might be better to generalize a location. Instead of naming a private home address, you might want to identify a neighborhood. Instead of mapping a sensitive site exactly, you might want to describe the broader area where this site is and keep the location restricted to the individuals that that individual that told you about is able to has trust in already. Digital care means thinking about the privacy from the very, very beginning. not something that happens after we've already created this material and after it's already been made public. And that's why metadata really, really matters, and why I'm incredibly privileged to have Jen here, because metadata is not simply information about an item. It's not. Metadata helps people understand what something is, who created it, when it was created, where it comes from, and the context that surrounds it. So metadata is not just technical, it's interpretive. And that's why we say, again, if Jen and I are no longer there and there's someone else who's doing this work, a lot of people in this world are doing this work, the way that we write that metadata is how things will get interpreted. So the way that the words that we use to describe materials shape the way that people are going to understand that material. So when we describe community materials, we want to be respectful culturally and use culturally responsible language. We want to include the names and terms communities use for themselves. You might run into an individual that you don't know their full legal name until months, years, sometimes lives later, because they went through a nickname that you thought was their legal name. And you know what? That's how they wanted to be remembered. We want to make room for that. We want to make room for bilingual or multilingual descriptions whenever possible. And we want to avoid flattening a story into a single institutional labor, because then we're going against our entire ethics of this entire thing. So the Abuelas project, the Abuelas archive, is really one way LHC is thinking about these questions. So the steps that we see here, and the way we go about, it's designed to collect and preserve memories, photographs, stories, and intergenerational knowledge that's connected to Latinx life, family history, and community memory. And although the name invokes abuelas, the archive itself, it's not just about our grandmothers. It's really about this broader way knowledge is passed down through families and through communities, through elders, parents, tias, tios, neighborhoods, teachers. It's really about how there were these ancestors and these individuals that cared and that remembered and intentionally passed down stories. And it's really our responsibility to keep that alive. So the goal is to not just collect the story. The goal is to honor the relationship and cultural knowledge behind them. So when we think about digital archiving through LHC, we're thinking about consent, access, cultural context, language, place, and long-term steward. So a good digital archive does not just make things visible. It protects context, it protects the consent, and it protects the community dignity. So hitting the next slide. We talked a lot about maps as well, and you're probably like, how, if you told us what's an archive, what's a map? Great question. I tell my family all the time I make maps, and they're like, what are you talking about? So I kind of don't make maps. Y'all make maps with me. So memory mapping is another tool that we have here at LHC, that helps us with the digital process of this archive. So a memory map is, in its essence, a base map. It could be a satellite Google Maps screenshot or Apple Maps or whatever you use of a specific area. And memory mapping combines the tools of oral histories onto a place-based experience. So all the pictures that you have seen across this presentation have been experiences that Jen and I have led with the public across the United States, where we ask you a series of questions of what's a site of joy? What's a site of not joy? However you define not joy. What's a site of prosperity? What's a memory you have in this general area? And all of this is because official maps often do not include Latinx heritage, and they don't include sites that are not in existence anymore. And we're missing a lot of that. So with memory maps, it again gives the audience and it gives our participants the power to tell us what is important and to tell us what needs to be remembered by quite literally taking pen to paper and putting an X and saying, right here is where I had my first romantic interest and I had to run home because my parents were waiting for me at the soccer fields or something like that. Or right here is where we had my quince and this is where we took pictures and it's very beautiful. It was a sunny day and that's what I remember, right? So memory mapping is a really awesome tool that if you have any questions about that, a lot of it is within the Abuela's Guide. Next slide. So what we also wanted to show in this presentation was a story map. So across all of this, we're collecting all these memories, we're collecting these photographs, we're the oral histories, and we didn't want to do was have a 20-page black and white report on what the history was that happened there. We want it to be immersive. We know that the Latinx experience, it's about colors, it's about sounds, it's about way, it's this immersive, you feel it experience. So story maps is our answer to that, where here we're able to create a generational knowledge sharing where you see the photographs, you hear directly from the participants, and it's not a book that might collect dust on the shelf. It's a really cool digital experience where you get the information. For the most part, Jen and I, we work together to make sure that the language is accessible for across generations, but also this gets shared back to our participants and they read through this and they tell us, I didn't like that quote you used, or that's not what this was called. It's actually referred to this. So it's this back and forth experience
I
of
didn't
what it
like
is.
that picture of me. Please change it.
Yeah. So I really wanted to show this because this is an example of what LHC, our digital archive, the kind of where all of it comes to be is here. I'm going to pass it back to Jen though.
So, thank you, Karina. And that she does a beautiful job, and she really does not give herself enough credit for how amazing she makes those look. That is some tech stuff that I cannot do. It's just gorgeous. But really, I want to come back to talking about ethics again. I know we've said it several times now, and hopefully that highlights how important this is. So it's the most important part probably of community archiving. So really think about safety as preservation work. Sometimes when we talk about preservation, we focus on saving the material, the photograph, the building, the document, the recording. But in community-based work, we really have to protect the people connected to these materials. That means we have to think about privacy, emotional safety, cultural protocols, and the possible risks of public visibility, especially nowadays. Consent, again, should be ongoing and not one time. Participants should understand where their materials are going to live, how we're going to use them, who is going to see them, and whether or not they can change access later. And we should avoid collecting sensitive information unless it's truly necessary and clearly consented to. For example, we do not need to collect someone's immigration status to preserve a family story. We do not need to publish someone's home address to document a place-based history. We don't need to make a painful story public just because it's historically important. Care really requires discernment. So, Karina, I'm going to pass it back to you real quick. Do you want to talk about that in the digital and mapping side?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I don't think I know, one of the things that happens is that our digital material and our maps, they travel a lot further than what we expect. Which is a twofold kind of experience, right? We're getting visibility on these untold stories. At the same time, these stories could be downloaded, reshared, screenshotted, and separated from its original context and used for harm. So that doesn't mean that we need to avoid digital archiving or the digital experience, right? Because digital access is incredibly meaningful and it has been such a successful tool for us across these years. But we need to make sure that we're building safeguards into that project from the beginning and not an afterthought. So for mapped materials, this means deciding whether or not, as we've been saying, to use exact points or to use approximate locations. And to keep some internal records private until maybe in the future the individual feels as though they feel more safe and more secure to make certain things more public, and vice versa, where in the future we might be in a different context and they might want some things taken off. So for photographs, it might mean if the people in the image have consented to public sharing. For oral histories, it might mean having restricted access, only using excerpts instead of full recordings. And for metadata, it means describing people and places with care. So descriptions should not expose people to harm. It should not use language that misinterprets the community, and it should not erase cultural context. So really what we're doing here is just making sure that individuals that are sharing with us and are working with us, they're at the center of it, and that we are protecting them as much as we can protect them. I think that's what I wanted to say, Jen.
Yes. And that means we have to be accountable, right? We have to continue the relationship after the archive is created, after we've collected the material. As I said before, it's follow through. It's really a big part of trust. And when we talk about decolonial archiving, trust is not extra. It's a feature, right? It's the foundation. Excuse me. And also, not everything has to become public once it's preserved, right, Karina?
Yeah, there's when it comes to decolonial kind of knowledge sharing and create and kind of just experience, there's this saying, especially if you exist within the academic world, the first question you kind of get asked is like, where's the gap? Or you might hear of other institutions being like, we found this new knowledge and this new experience that no one has ever uncovered before. And you're like, that's my everyday lived experience. What are you talking about? That wasn't a gap. That's the way we've been existing. So it's remembering that not everything needs to be public to be preserved. And it's remembering that not everything needs to be accessible to certain individual institutions. And to remember that um, when individuals select to share with you, they're selecting to share with care and with an understanding that that care is going to be given back to them. So a community archive, it's going to have some restriction access. And it's still powerful. It's still something that's incredibly important. A map can be used internally for planar education without that map needing to be shared out to the public. So sometimes the most ethical decision that you can do to preserve something carefully is making it not fully visible. Um, yeah, Jen?
That's a really important point. Visibility can be powerful, but visibility is not always the goal, right? The goal is care, it's consent, and it's community defined preservation. So as people begin this work, we really encourage you to ask, not only how can we share this, but how should this be cared for and who should decide? And that leads us to our final section, which is what you can do next. And as we begin, it's going to be me to close. I'll start us off. I want to leave you with some practical next steps. You do not need to start with a large archive or a large project. Remember, start small. Choose one small collection or one piece of community memory to begin with. That might be a family photo box, a folder of event flyers, a collection of recipes, a set of church programs, a community celebration, a place that people remember that no longer exists, which we find a lot on memory maps. Then you want to ask who owns these materials, who has cared for them, what does the owner want with them, done with them? How should they be copied? Could they be copied? Can they be shared? Should they remain private? What context needs to be included so that the story is not misunderstood? That's always really important. And then once you're there, you can do a basic inventory. Write down what the item is, who it belongs to, where it came from, what date or place it's connected to, and any important story behind it. And if you scan materials, save them in more than one location, which is really important. Use a clear file name, right? And make sure that you decide on how you're going to name your files before you start naming them, because otherwise it's a mess. Keep track of consent, right? Share copies back with the person, the family, the organization. And when you describe materials, if you do them yourself, the descriptions, use the community's own words whenever possible. And that might mean preserving Spanish language titles, family nicknames, as Karina said. I did not know my grandmother's full name was Cipriana until I was an adult. She went by Chana. I did not know. Neighborhood names, culturally specific terms that carry meaning, right? There are even slang words that I know we've used in California that they don't use in Texas when they speak Spanish. There's just different words. It's all part of the archive. Language is so important. You can also think about how LHC's tools might support your work. Our Abuela's Guide and our Latinx Preservation Toolkit, I will do a shameless plug. They can be used as starting points for family preservation, for classroom activities, community workshops, oral history projects, memory mapping, or even local archiving efforts. Our Abuela's Archive, also another shameless plug, can be a place to submit stories, photographs, and memories connected to this intergenerational knowledge and Latinx community life. But the important thing, no matter where your materials live, the same principles always apply. My dogs. Begin with listening, build trust, ask for consent, describe with care, always return the copies, always protect privacy, and keep your archive living. Community archive grows through relationships. It grows through follow through. It grows through the belief that our communities already hold the knowledge that's worth preserving. And now, Karina and I will close this before we move into questions. And just remember that community archiving reminds us that our histories are not only found in official records, they live in our homes, our neighborhoods, our languages, our food, our songs, our grief, our joy, and relationships to place. So when we care for these materials and memories, we are not only preserving the past, but this is the important part, we're really creating pathways for future generations to know where they come from and why their stories matter. So we can be that old abuela that tells the same story 80 times and our kids don't want to hear it, our grandkids don't want to hear it, and I don't care, I'm going to tell it again.
I think, Renee, can you go to the next slide? I want us to sit with this quote for a little bit. This was actually from an oral history that we did in Flagstaff, Arizona. And Jesse, that was a journey. Jesse and Irene, his wife, I love them to pieces. But he really ended his oral history with this quote. And I think that this kind of sums up what the abuela's experience is at LHC and what we kind of wanted to share here in this webinar is that Jesse said it's because if you don't preserve what you had, you don't always know what you have. And so some of the things that we have now is because of what the old people did for us. I mean, that's what they did for us. They showed us how to survive. They showed us how to make ends meet. They showed us how to be neighbors and protect each other and to take care of each other. So when we invite you to think about what archiving already exists in your family, your neighborhood, and community, we're asking you what stories are already being carried? What materials are you already caring for? What places hold those memories? And what kind of support or protection might those stories need next? Jen?
And at LHC, we really believe that preservation begins with community. It begins with listening and remembering, with documenting and caring for the places and the stories that hold us. So as you leave today, we hope you really remember that you do not need to be an archivist, a historian, or a preservation professional to begin. You can really begin with one story, with one photograph, with one conversation, with one memory. Each of these acts matters, and together they help us say we are here and our stories will continue. And thank you so much for being with us today. We would love to open it now for questions, reflections, or examples from your own community archiving work if you have started already.
Thank you all so much for a wonderful presentation. We'll start with the question in the chat, and as we continue, you're welcome to put your question in the chat, or even come off mute and ask our presenters. So from Becky, I see. Thank you so much for this at the archive. But yes, what a great conversation. So do we have any questions from the crowd? Eduardo, go ahead. See you there.
Good afternoon. So I'm here in Chicago with the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. And, we have here as part of, we also have a museum, the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture. And they've been working on a it's called Digitizing El Barrio project, where they're, archiving the 50 years of the Puerto Rican cultural centers and just community archive. But I just wanted to talk about one interesting thing. Back in 2020, when the Puerto Rican Cultural Center had moved, it's a over 50-year-old organization now, had moved its archive, different buildings. But one interesting thing was there was some archives, there were several buildings, but there was one in a basement. And unfortunately, that was like they were in cardboard boxes. A lot of the material was rotting. There was a lot of rodent feces. And, it was just a really terrible thing. And so one of the decisions, because there were many spots like that, but this one was like the worst one. And one of the decisions were made instead of putting, the volunteers and people at risk by going in there and trying to clean that out and excavate it, they were just like, we're just gonna let this go. You know what I mean? Um, Not that it was a great loss because there were other locations, but not all of the personnel in the history of the organizations were trained to look at things, materials, and say, okay, we need to really protect and preserve these for later people to handle. They would just put in, wherever there was a space that they could dump it in. But that was a lesson, something very interesting to learn, especially for older Latino organizations or what have you, um, that their current record or their present is tomorrow's archive and important things, and that, at least some of those things or one or two copies of the things need to be put away in a place that, in the future, somebody can come and say, okay, aquí tenemos, something of value that we can look through, that we can, as opposed to dumping it in a basement. And we went through many basements to rescue things, and a lot of things again were rescued, and some were just like, okay, heaven take them. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of, I forget who we were talking to, Karina. Or maybe it was with another organization, but I was talking about as the archivist, like when you are creating this archive, think about who is coming in the future to take over for you. Karina had mentioned it earlier, but with this one archive I was speaking with, they were like, yeah, we just let the people add their own tags when they submit something. I said, well, the person 20 years down the line is going to have 90 tags that don't all are cohesive, so you're leaving them a mess. So think about, yeah, think about like with the documents down that are, you're just, they end up where they end up. Really, who's coming in after? Who's going to be there later? And are they going to have a system to pick up in the future? So yeah, this just long-term stewardship is
And
it's
it's so stressful,
understandable.
Eduardo. Like, I'm thinking here. So I live specifically like right between Carolina and Canóvana. So in this side of the island, like it gets hot, but we get a lot of humidity over here compared to like the Mayagüez area. That's some San Germán, that's some dry heat that every single time I gotta go over there, I'm like, oh, I'm burning. But because it's so humid here, there's when my godfather he passed, I came, my godmother had his disco, like the records. Instead of them being vertical how you're supposed to have them, she had them stacked on top of each other. And because the humidity got warped, and he had some original records that he inherited from a great uncle that was like one of the cool like dancers in New York's and all the clubs and stuff like that. So some of the, I still those records are now in my parents' house, how they should be. But I think about that a lot because I'm like, there are people who do want to care for it, but they don't know. They don't know how to care for these materials. So she had it in a corner because she was like, I think these are nice. I think someone's gonna want them, but she didn't have the knowledge of how to properly like stand them. And I was just at a family funeral and I came across an uncle and he's like, oh, I got all of those boxes of the fixtures. It's like he was like, oh, it's in that one room. Like I broom that room every now and then. And immediately in my brain, I was like, does that room have AC? Does that room, do you open the window every now and then? Like what's happening? Because it's exactly that. Like these materials, they're sensitive, they're old, like things deteriorate. It happens. Us as human, we deteriorate. So that is something that me and Jen, as we go through with different people and we sit with elders and they just randomly pull out a box randomly and the corners are torn and they're like, be careful. And me and Jen are standing there like, okay. But you're right. It's one of those, it's a sad thing that happens that sometimes we gotta lose things because we didn't know how to properly caretake for it. But now we do. Now we're learning our lessons. Um, so thank you for sharing that because it's something that yeah, I think about my records all the time. Like I'm like those are my babies, but I almost lost them. And some of them because they did experience warping, some of the songs skip and it is what it is.
I was going to share that I previously I worked at a museum that had a long institutional history. Their first collection was like in 1968, and it went through maybe two or three, and by the time I got in there, like four different archivists from the past, and it had a touch of each of their characters, right? Like how they organize things. But there were so many lessons there. We had a media closet, which where we put everything that was kind of media in there, and we eventually will get to it. until we noticed a really hard smell of vinegar. Just like, what's going on? And with reel to reel that we had in there with some of the negatives, they started experiencing vinegar syndrome because those are film on acetate. And when that breaks down, there's no way to reverse it. And we had somebody come in and help us out and just help us do a survey. And the only thing we could do was buy freezers to just minimize that and eventually one day digitize them. But yeah, it's all those lessons, those things you don't think about, different materials, right? Like yeah, all those things. And when it's from when it's a long-term history of an institution, you kind of got to forgive yourself a little bit sometimes and just know that, we're doing the best and keep those systems updated. Uh, cool. Awesome conversation. Gracias, Eduardo, for sharing. If anybody else wants to jump on, Francisco, I see you there. Welcome to ask your question. Hola.
Oh, can I jump in? Yes. Oh, okay. So, Rene, you were part of that Socorro, yes? The Bracero program. Am I right? On
I
the
got
Rio.
to visit when the National Historic Landmark was unveiled. I believe
Oh,
it's the only one in the country still. It's in two languages, English and Spanish.
and that one actually was, I mean, big thing for my father because my father was a bracero and stationed there in Socorro, I recall. So, and I actually did the summit that UTEP and others, I think, put together. So I got to interview three of the braceros, including my father was one of them. So my question to you, or for you guys that are collecting this information, so if there's something interesting that a researcher per se is wanting to obtain either a copy or from a bracero or from this or a testimony or a document, how do they go about in obtaining that?
I think that's great. I've had it happen before where we've had like a news reporter. So not the same thing, but like a similar experience. Like a news reporter wanted um photographs of a particular area. So our comms communicator, she like asked us about it. She's like, hey, like, is there's this? And I have to pick up the phone and just call. I'll sometimes call and I was just like, hey, there's this person that wants to do XYZ. Is it cool if I send over the pictures? Would you like to directly talk to that? I've had it happen two ways where sometimes they're like, yeah, of course, I want to be involved in that. And then I've had some people be like, can I talk to them? Like, I want to hear it from them. And I feel like with elders and with individuals who are always in the academic spaces or in the news media spaces, they sometimes just want to hear it. They just sometimes just want to be spoken to and explained and just see that person's face. Like, you know how it's like a generational thing that when you call someone and like the first question you ask is like, who am I speaking to? And you write down the name of the person you spoke to. I feel like that's a really common experience that happens with me, where oftentimes I'm just like, there's this individual, they want to do XYZ. Do you want to talk to them? And then I go back, I'm like, hey, they want to talk to you. Can we set up a three-way call or something like that? Or is it okay if I share your number? Because sometimes getting these elders on a Zoom is not happening. But I'm like, they will answer the phone. They will.
But what about Karina? So I can let Eduardo, go
Yeah.
next. What if that person is no longer there?
Ooh.
What if I mean, so that becomes like something that you or whoever's holding the archives should, I would say, have the ability to come up with, like, say, an initial contract with the people, with the family, with whoever, to
Yep.
at least allow this to be put out and then be given the recognition or a payment or whatever
Yep.
thing that you might need, for them to feel like they are being recognized.
That's true.
Not all the time you can have that person. Like I
Yep.
said, we don't live forever.
You
So,
should.
so
Yeah.
what do you do then? So just I'm throwing that out to you so that Eduardo can then, you know,
And I think Jen too. Jen, you talked about this a lot.
I've had it happen, not here, but
Um,
at other places. And if it wasn't like a next of kin or something like that signed, other contact information, I literally just search and I research until I find until I find a way to contact the family and ask, because it's you don't always have the foresight to think like maybe they were in their 40s and then something happened. And you didn't know that, they weren't an elder. So it's really I always say the onus is on us to then do our research and find them. If we don't have that information, you have to find it. And do the best that you absolutely can. I haven't, luckily so far, yeah, your diligence and just do the best you can. I haven't had it happen where I wasn't able to find the family, so at least that's been good because they stayed kind of in the same area. So I was able to find them, but that's what I've done, and I would hope that whoever takes over after us would be the same way. Honestly, yeah, I would hope. Mhm.
Did anybody have any other questions for our speakers for today? Thank you all again, just everyone so much for joining and continuing this conversation, because it definitely is work that takes a lot of time and care. We hope that this can help with some tools. We're here to help out with LHC especially, and we really appreciate y'all as members for joining and supporting us. Once again, just a friendly reminder, this was recorded. The members will get early access. We'll send a link tomorrow, and then we'll publish it publicly on our YouTube and as well as our website. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And we want to thank our presenters, Jen, Karina, for joining us. Don't forget, we're having another membership webinar like this in September. And like I mentioned, feel free to reach out for us. Thank you all so much for your support of LHC.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.